What you are about to watch, in some cases, may be nothing more than an active imagination mixed with bits of internet hearsay, family grief, denial and media exaggeration. But in this programme, you'll also have the opportunity to look at bits of evidence supporting both sides of the argument of whether there is a serial killer or whether the deaths are just unfortunate accidents. But please be advised that there are scenes that some viewers may find upsetting and are of an adult nature. For the past few years I've been searching the water deaths here in Manchester's canals in order to at least get some sort of answer to why there are so many. But it seems the more that I dig, the more complicated it gets, and new bodies are still appearing. Now I have to be honest, I was hoping to have this film finished within the next few months, but because of the complex nature of the story, I've had to extend it into multiple episodes because every time I get close to ending it, something else happens. Now it seems to me that people's lives are being extinguished at an alarming rate as we all just stand by watching at the sidelines because people simply can't agree whether the deaths are suspicious or not. But one family that does think their son's death is suspicious is that of Souvik Pal. Souvik Pal was an 18-year-old Indian student who had travelled from his home in Bangalore to study at the University of Manchester. Souvik had been out with friends to a club called the Warehouse Project, which is a popular dance venue in the city. It's then said that he was ejected from the club by door staff who believed he had taken drugs and was refused entry because it claimed that he was acting aggressively. It's then said that he walked away from the club with an unknown male following close behind, and apart from some very grainy CCTV images, that was the last time that he was seen alive. I spoke to his father on the phone to try and find out more. Thanks for speaking to me about your son's death. Could you just tell me a bit about what he was like?
He was a very jovial and joyful boy. He has completed his 12th standard education in India, and then he was excited to do his product design courses from Manchester Metropolitan University, and then he had gone there to pursue his studies.
Now, I know your son actually went missing on New Year's Eve. I think it was 2013. When was the last time you actually spoke to him?
Before the 31st night. Probably it was midnight in India, but there it was little in the evening or so. At that time we had spoken with him.
Now, I know New Year's Eve was a very busy time, so when did you actually know that something was wrong?
When we had got a call from UK police inquiring about the parents of Souvik Pal. At that time we came to know that he is missing.
So your son has gone missing. The police are now searching for him. So did they find him straight away?
He was there in the spot, which is just 50 meters away, and police couldn't found him in spite of using the latest gadget in UK. They have used divers, they have used sonar, and they couldn't found the body. We didn't knew about the fate till after 22 days of painful waiting, anxiously waiting, we came to know about the fate.
So let me just get this right. What you're saying is the police have done a search using divers, all the latest equipment, and found nothing. And then 22 days later, your son's body has resurfaced in the exact same place that they were searching. And nobody finds that strange?
Yeah.
Do you think somebody else is involved?
Yeah, absolutely. There is one man who was following my son, as we could see from the picture. And that clipping is there with Manchester Police. There were certain points of CCTV camera on the warehouse and the surrounding areas. Souvik was walking with another human-like figure which cannot be recognized. Now, after a certain time, only one gentleman or human-like figure has come up from the embankment of the canal. And that is what has been recorded. My submission here is that if two persons has gone and one person has come up from that embankment, then what does it conclude? It concludes that that gentleman has certainly some knowledge about what has happened to Souvik.
So there you go. That's yet another person claiming that their son's death was suspicious. Plus, who was the male following Souvik that night? And why has he never come forward? Was that male ever in the club? If so, have the club not got CCTV in the main entrance in order to get facials of everyone coming in and out, and for the protection of their door staff? Also, that's another person saying that the police searched the area thoroughly, only for the body to be found in the same part of water that they checked. The pathologist stated that the cause of death was drowning and there was no physical injuries, which is remarkable for a body that spent 22 days in water, most probably banging up against walls, stones and whatever else was in the canal at that time. Right, I've been contacted by the divers by email and something really unsuspecting has happened. They've all pulled out. I'm not happy about it, but these things happen, and I'm really at a crossroads now what to do. Or I was at a crossroads of what to do, because what I actually did was, as soon as I got the email, I contacted Dale, explained to him what was going on. And we spent a few hours deciding, you know, text backwards and forwards and speaking on the phone, etc., what we were going to do. And the conclusion to it all is we're still going to go ahead with it, but the only problem, which I'm not happy about, is I can't do it drunk. Now, I know Dale's a trained diver, but he's going to be there on his own. He's going to be manning the camera on the side of the canal, so that just leaves me going into the water on my own. Absolutely gutted, because I really did want to see what would happen if a drunk person went into the canal, to try and put a rest to all this once and for all. However, like I said, we'll still do it. I think we'll look at whether I can get out, you know, how deep it is, how cold it is, etc. At least that'll show part of it. But like I said, still gutted. So with the upset of the divers pulling out just a couple of days before I was due to film, I was then contacted by Nick Pope asking if I wanted to film Charlie's funeral in order to show the impact that was caused by not placing something as simple as barriers along Manchester's canals. Manchester has come up with all sorts of excuses on why they can't put barriers up, and the main reason being money. But if you go back to previous things that they've spent their money on, you start to ask, just how much is a life worth? In 2003, the council spent approximately £2 million on a sculpture for the city called Bang, which eventually fell apart and was scrapped for a mere £17,000. In 2010, the council spent a further £150,000 on statues, which was followed up in 2012 by a further £425,000 on a gig by Alicia Keys. And in 2017, it was announced that a further £750,000 would be spent on bee sculptures. Now, I'm all for making Manchester more tuned into the arts and spreading a bit of culture to make the city visually interesting. But when it comes to the detriment of people's lives, I think someone needs to take a hard look at what the money is being spent on. I mean, just think how many lives and how much heartache all that money could have saved if it would have been spent on barriers, better lighting and better security features. Now, I tried to contact Manchester Council's Richard Lees and Pat Kearney, Manchester's Mayor Andy Burnham, the Canal Trust and Peel Holdings, who own the Bridgewater Canal, and none of them replied, despite of numerous attempts. I arrived in Newcastle for Charlie's funeral, and this is where I was supposed to say my piece to camera. But for the first time, I was so choked, I couldn't get any words out that would justify why a family should be going through such an ordeal. So for those in Manchester that have the power to do something, how do you justify spending money on this, this and this when you could have maybe have stopped this?
Now, while at Charlie's funeral, I remember standing there looking at all the young people who were no older than my own daughter's age carrying his coffin. And I started to realise at that point just how brave Nick actually is. It must be so hard to fight for something knowing that the end goal isn't going to bring your son back. And for something that should have just had a common sense approach in the first place, rather than the value of money placed on it. Now, my personal view on all this is that Nick shouldn't have to go on TV, he shouldn't have to do interview after interview and beg for barriers and then ask to go into meetings that he should be allowed to go into and write hundreds of emails. And Alona, even though she's an exceptional young woman, shouldn't have had to campaign tirelessly on his behalf. Now, when Charlie died, Nick should have been treated as a human being with compassion and allowed to grieve in peace and not in public. But instead, he had to endure months of torture as people argued for money and who was going to write the cheque. But if that wasn't bad enough, he then had to hear the news that another young man had lost his life where Charlie had died, and now another family has to go through the same ordeal.
As a matter of fact, it was more than one young man's family that suffered after there were 6 water deaths around the county of Greater Manchester in June 2018. But even if you go back to April 2018, a story broke that made everyone stop and the whole pusher threat was revived. It's claimed that a cyclist was riding home after a late shift at work at around 10 PM when he was pushed into the canal by a lone male dressed in black. It's then claimed that the victim tried to get out and the male kicked him back into the water and then ran off. Straight away, everybody started screaming the pusher and the story raised its ugly head again. I mean, even the victim's wife went onto Facebook stating the police had confirmed that the description matched that of the pusher. 1 second, why would the police say that if they were denying there was any such person? Either the victim's wife is telling porkies, or maybe just getting a bit carried away with herself. Or the police have let something slip and something is going on. I mean, come on, would the police lie? The deeper I go into this, the more confusing it gets, because when I try to get some answers from the authorities, they just close ranks and refuse to speak to me, or blatantly lie. To show you what I mean, this is a Freedom of Information request that I sent to GMP, asking them to provide me with how many canal deaths there had been in Manchester since January 2010 to the 1st of March 2018, along with the locations, times and dates that the call came through, and what time and date the bodies were found, plus the cause of death. They returned my request saying they had found 24 deaths within the city of Manchester, even though I'd stated Manchester, meaning it as a whole. But I'll put that down to a misunderstanding, because maybe I should have said Greater Manchester. So we'll just have to go with what I have. So, 24 deaths, and no further information I requested is held. Straight away, I know that to be untrue, because when the police receive a call in relation to a death, the force open what is called a FWIN, which stands for Force Wide Investigation Number. Everything is placed onto that FWIN that relates to the call. For example, which officers are going to the job, the time they arrived, if the report of a dead body is positive, the time the body was found, and then other things start getting added, like the time scenes of crime arrived. This is so that the officers investigating can go over all the evidence at a later date. When I questioned this, I was told they would get back to me, and never did. So, this just leaves me with the dates. I started to look for some sort of pattern, and this is what I found. The most active day to find a body was a Friday. The least active day was a Thursday. The most active date would have been the 22nd, and numerous dates that had no bodies found. The most active month was October with 5, and the least active was a joint tie between July and November with none. The most active year was 2013 with 6, and the least active year was joint by 2010 and 2017 with only 1. Now what you will notice is that most of the deaths are in the winter months when the water is at its coldest and over a weekend period. which, as you all know, alcohol contributes to most of the deaths, if you believe in the accident theory. But to throw a spanner in the works in favour of those in the serial killer camp, here is something that may interest you. If you look at the 8 years supplied by GMP and look at the number of deaths, you'll soon notice they count up to 6 and then restart. Does this mean anything? Or is it just a coincidence? Now, Manchester has a very big boating community and people come from all over the country to travel a very large network. But something I'd like to know is if railings were put up, would that impact them as boaters in any way? I spoke to one local, but getting the answer was easier said than done. If they did put up barriers, would it impact you as a bolter in any way?
I mean, we already have special keys for using certain equipment up and down the system.
But would it impact you? Would it impact
I mean, it's a leisurely pursuit at the moment, isn't it?
You're not answering it directly.
I don't think they have a set time for becoming a statistic.
But would it impact you?
I mean, a lot of people these days, they've got the headphones on, they're on the phones, they don't look where they're going or what they're doing.
You're not answering it directly.
Well, if you want me to answer it directly, then...
Would it impact you as a boater?
Yes, but not a great deal.
So there you go. The top and bottom line is that railings wouldn't stop the boating community from enjoying their hobby or impacting too much on their lifestyle choice. Yes, it may be a slight hindrance, but surely saving a life is more important, is it not? Well, the time had come finally for me to go into the canal after weeks of preparations, so hopefully this will give me and you some of the answers that I needed. Now, with all documentaries, things change. Initially I was going to actually do this drunk to get the full effect, but obviously because the divers have pulled out, I can't do that anymore. So what I've decided to do is I'm still going to go ahead with it. I'm going to still go into the canal, but the idea is to see two things really. One is to see whether I can actually stand up in the canal, and the other one is to actually see how hard it is to get out, because I'm 5'7", and some of these lads that have actually gone in are 6 foot plus, so it's going to be very interesting. Altogether we had 3 cameras filming the canal in order to have all angles covered. We did our final preparations before I took the plunge to see how hard it was for a fully clothed person to get out of the canal. Right, I think one of the first things we need to do is obviously check, see how deep it is on the edges. I've got an actual boom pole for this, so what I'm going to do is stick that in there. And then we'll just measure it to see exactly how deep that is on the sides. Just over 3 foot, so it's 3 foot on the side. So the idea is when I go in, I'm going to try and get to the middle. It depends on how cold it is and what happens, and then I'll try and see whether I can stand up. If I can stand up, then I might even measure it just to see how deep it actually is. Okay, so now it's the moment of truth. So that is everything set up, but I have no idea what's in the water and I'm basically winging it, so what happens from now happens. But I'm sure I don't really need to tell you that I really wouldn't recommend anyone else doing this. There's all sorts of things that could go wrong, including knocking myself out, landing on something sharp, or even getting some sort of disease. The idea now is I'm just going to basically throw myself in and then see what happens from there. Things I do, Faye.
It's cold. Definitely cold. Right. So, I can't even talk. It's that cold. I'm gonna try and go a bit further out. See how deep it is. Can you get me the boom pole?
Yeah, yeah. Not standing depth there.
Right, I can't even touch the floor on that side. As you can see, the boom pole went right under. I really don't know how deep that is, but according to everybody it's around about 5 foot. It's certainly deeper than 5 foot. So I think the thing now is try and see how hard it is to get out. So that said, it's about 3 foot here. Let's see if I can get out on my own. Right, there you go. I managed it out quite easily. So the question is, I know people are drunk, but normally when they fall into the side. The side is about 3 foot. You can stand up, it's quite easy to get out, but it is very, very cold, and it did take my breath away. So I can imagine on a total surprise factor where you would go in unsuspectingly, you might swallow water. The actual shock of it, of just going in, would be really bad. I would thought you just swallowed it. You struggle for breath. So could these be accidents, or is it a serial killer? I still don't know, I'll be honest with you. I really don't know, but at least that shows what it is actually like to go into the canal fully clothed like I am. But how about when it's like this, night time? I'm in the same place as what I was in during the day. However, at night time it's a completely different story. Now you can see me at the moment because I've got a light on. But now I'm going to turn the light out and this is what it looks like. It's a whole new ball game. Now I know some of you are expecting me to go back into the water to help prove the point. And to be honest, it did cross my mind. But I'm brave, not stupid, and I think the emergency services have got more to deal with than dragging my fat ass out of a canal. So what happens when you drown? Most people think when you fall into a river or canal, etc., you go under, you swallow a load of water, and then your lungs fill up and then you die. But according to Wikipedia, in the early stages of some drowning incidents, it's said that very little water actually enters the lungs, and the water that does find its way in can cause a muscular spasm that constricts the vocal cords, that then seals the airway, prevents the passage of both air and water until the person becomes unconscious. Now this is actually known as dry drowning, and this means that the person who is actually drowning is often unable to shout or call for help because they can't get enough air. Now, as you saw when I went in, even though I never choked on water, I was still struggling to talk. And this is because of how cold it was, and I was expecting to go in. I was sober and it was daylight. But even with all those factors, my body still struggled to cope with the instant change in temperature, which is said to start at approximately 21 Celsius, which in turn starts what is known as the diving reflex. The diving reflex is the body's physiological response to submersion in cold water, and includes selectively shutting down parts of the body in order to conserve energy for survival. So, with 21 Celsius actually on my mind, I needed to revisit to actually see how cold the water actually was. Now remember, anything under that was apparently putting my life in danger. Well, I'm back at the canal again, and as you can see, it's a lovely day, but I want to see how cold it is. So what I've done is I brought the boom pole back with me, I've bought this little gadget, which is what you put into fish tanks to gauge the temperature of the water. I've attached it to the boom pole, and I'm now going to place that into the canal, and hopefully we'll get some sort of reading, and then we'll actually see how cold it is when a person actually goes into a canal. Right, I'm about to put the boom pole in. This will hopefully give me an indication of how cold I was when I went in initially. So here we go, moment of truth. There you go, that's 11.9. So there you go, 11.9 after only a few seconds submerged under the water. Now, by all accounts, my body was already on its way to closing things down, starting with my vocal cords, which you saw. But this also shows just how fast all this takes place. Now, as I've already stated, this documentary was originally just one part. But just as I thought I was done and dusted, another thing happened. And then another, and another. A bit like this. In June 2018, it said that a father and son from Leeds travelled to Huddersfield to partake in some magnet fishing, only to disappear. A witness claimed that she passed some personal belongings on the side of the canal, so she reported it to the police, and that's when 2 bodies were found later on that day. This news article was from a local media source at the time.
What do you know about what's happened?
Nothing until we turned up this morning, and we just heard that 2 guys have drowned. First thing we've heard about it, unfortunately. We certainly wouldn't have been fishing if we'd have known.
What's your reaction?
Well, surprised really, particularly when there is means to get out of the canal, and the canal's not particularly deep.
Now, as you've just heard, the man being interviewed states his surprise at how the father and son couldn't get out because the canal isn't that deep. Here you have 2 able-bodied men who were found deceased, who were not drunk, and who have drowned in daylight hours. Now, it was at this point when someone from the US pointed me towards a case in America. Are you ready for this? A father and son go fishing and then go missing. This was the news report at the time from a local station in the US.
Have now recovered the bodies of a father and a son who disappeared Sunday night while fishing.
Their bodies were found in the Allegheny River, not far from where they'd been fishing in Lower Burrell. Brenda Waters joins us live with the latest. Brenda?
Hi, Christine. The bodies were removed from the Allegheny River here at the Tarentum Marina about an hour ago, and it was an outcome that family and friends had dreaded. Police found their red Chevy Blazer parked near a popular fishing spot near Low and Edgecliff Roads in Lower Burrell. Father and son had been fishing from the shoreline.
We found gear down along the river, and the family members were dressed in fishing gear. So I don't know what happened. Obviously something bad happened.
Again, 2 able-bodied men, no alcohol involved, and again this happened in daylight hours. The cases are that similar that you might think that you're just watching 2 different news stations reporting on the same story. But as I've already stated, these are 2 different cases on the opposite side of the world. Now, both police forces came to the same conclusion that there was no foul play on either of the deaths, and they were just unfortunate accidents. But what are your thoughts? Well, I suppose now would be the right time to go on a pusher hunt by walking along the canal towpaths at night all alone. I feel like a pig going to the slaughter. The last time I patrolled these canals looking for any signs of a serial killer, I had people saying, "You need to do it longer than a night, you need to spend a week there, you need to spend a month," etc, etc, you know how it goes. So I took all that on board and I went back at least 3 to 4 times a week for the next 6 weeks. But apart from 3 hard drives full of footage of canals in the dark and the odd courting couple, there was nothing to write home about. But I'll show you some of the cut scenes anyway, just to prove that I did go. You might want to go and make a nice cuppa at this point. Right, it's quite late, as you can see. It's very dark. I'm on the towpath of one of the canals. I think it's the Bridgewater. I'm not sure what's going to happen. I can't see very much far in front of me at the moment. There's lights on at the side. This part, there's quite a lot of boats on the other side as well. So, but even with the light that's over there, as you can see. I can't really see that far in front of me, so what I'm going to do is turn the camera around and we'll see if we can find anything. See if this elusive pusher comes forward. Now, I don't need to tell you that walking down the towpaths at night isn't advisable, because as you've already seen, things can happen, whether that be some kind of accident, mugging, or if the serial killer theory is right, an untimely death. But to help me deal with this a little bit better, the camera that I'm using is an action cam that I've converted in order to use the UV lighting rather than a torch. This helps me stay hidden in the dark, but also see what is happening in front of me. Technically, it's night vision on a budget. Right, I'm sure you've just seen, I've just come across a courting couple. Quite a surprise to me. I wasn't too sure what it was because I was actually looking on the screen. The screen's quite small because it's basically, this is a GoPro that's been converted into night vision or UV, whichever you want to call it. So I was looking at the screen, I thought I could see something, but I wasn't sure what it was. It turned out it was a couple stood in one of the, I think it was near the steps, and I think I interrupted them. Oh, well, let's carry on. So I walked up and down the canal for about an hour or so and then decided to try my luck somewhere else. After 6 weeks in the dark, one canal or river just starts to look like another. So without boring you any longer, I'll consider that bit done. When you make a programme like this, you get to see the highs and lows of life,
And like I've already stated, just when you think it's coming to an end, there's another twist thrown in your direction. Well, in my case, the final part of Charlie Pope's death was about to play out in the way of a march through Manchester in order to show support for his dad's campaign to get barriers put up on the city's canals.
I think it just means like showing support for the movement to put barriers up. So yeah, I think they should just put up the barriers. I mean, you know, it's like a thing that should happen. There's no reason it shouldn't. I mean, you wouldn't put no seatbelts in a car, so why would you not protect a canal?
I mean, the idea of having a barrier with some sort of gate or entrance to me would work. And I know other cities have had similar problems and they've found solutions to them, and it feels, and I know Nikki sort of said this, it feels very much like people are going to be thinking of things that they can do rather than, well, we can't do this for this reason, we can't do that for that reason. Think of what you can do.
In the city centre of Newcastle, we'll have like the River Tyne, there's barriers all the way along, you know, for miles and miles, because it's obviously, you know, it's not rocket science, is it? When you've got pubs, clubs, bars, what have you, people are going to have a drink, and you know, that's when accidents happen.
The one part of all this that I did want to look a bit closer at was that of the smiley face killers theory over in the US and some of the theories behind the stories, to see if there actually is a link between those deaths here in the UK or whether people are just getting caught up in a myth.
Ah, America, the land of hope and glory, the land of the free, home to the stars, a place that brought fast food to every man and his dog, and a country that protects the world. God bless America. Alright, I suppose I'm getting a bit carried away because according to Wikipedia, America is also home to the most serial killers in the world, and there is that many that the good old US of A has to have its own separate listing to contain all the nutjobs committing these crimes, because there's approximately 405, and I'm suspecting even that is on the low side. But hey, who's counting? But it's also home to many horror stories and myths, and the problem with myths and today's society is that we now have so much information at our fingertips, it's hard to distinguish what is fact and what is fiction. Most people's information portal used to be the library, newspapers and TV, but now it's the internet, and that has already been proven to have fake stories all over the place, which Mr. Trump likes to remind everyone about.
But once a myth or a story takes hold, it can then start to blur the lines between reality and fantasy for some people, and that can become seriously dangerous.
A perfect example of all this are the Slender Man stories, which originated from an internet forum called Creepypasta. First coming into existence in 2009, Slender Man is said to be a featureless supernatural being who is extremely tall and who abducts children.
But since we actually know who created the character and when it first appeared, we also know that it's just nothing more than a scary story.
But this didn't stop two 12-year-old girls from holding down their friend and stabbing her 19 times in order to become proxies of Slender Man after they read the story online. But without going too much into detail, this just shows how a myth can get out of control.
But what if a story that was part of a myth actually turned out to be true?
Now, as we've already figured out, there are times when the police make mistakes, whether that because of lack of evidence or simply because of lazy policing, by just making assumptions rather than actually investigating the death properly.
Now, one such case was that of young American Christopher Jenkins.
When most people think of the Mississippi River, they think of deep dark forests covered in swampland, and the odd redneck running around screaming, "Squeal like a pig, boy!" But the river is much more than that and actually runs through the city of Minneapolis, which is a far stretch away from the backwoods of swamp life. The 16th largest metropolitan area in the United States, Minneapolis is a hive of entertainment. And this is where 21-year-old Chris Jenkins went missing after a night out on Halloween 2002. It's said that Chris and a group of his friends visited the Lone Tree Bar and Grill in downtown Minneapolis at around 10:30. They were all in fancy dress and enjoying the night, and then it's said about an hour and a half later, 2 off-duty police officers who were working as doormen ejected Chris and wouldn't let him back inside. It's then said that Chris found himself out in the street in extremely cold weather wearing only an Indian costume. He had no coat, no wallet, mobile phone or keys for his car or apartment, and from that moment on, Chris vanished.
Four months later, Chris's body was found in the Mississippi River. The manner of death was listed as unknown. However, it was presumed to be a suicide or an accident, and then the case was closed.
Until this happened.
Chris Jenkins was a popular college student who simply vanished. 4 months later, he was found dead. First, Minneapolis police thought Chris Jenkins was just a drunk college kid who accidentally fell into the Mississippi River. Then, they said he was murdered. That finding was the turning point in an investigation that now calls into question the cause of death in more than 40 cases.
Now, the only reason the police came to this conclusion was because Chris's family never accepted the police's version of events and then went on to hire a private detective.
It's said that the detective used 2 separate bloodhounds who had never worked together, and they followed Chris's scent to the parking garage next door to the bar that he'd left. It's then said that drops of blood and a red feather belonging to Chris's Indian costume were eventually found in the garage, but the trail stopped there.
But the family went further and researched drownings and spoke to experts who stated that Chris's body just didn't fit the appearance of a person who had committed suicide or had had an accident.
The reason for this is because due to the natural reaction to try and swim, most bodies are found face down, arms out to the sides, clothing dishevelled and one or more of their shoes missing. But Chris was found on his back with his arms crossed in front of him, with his clothing neatly tucked in, plus he was still wearing his slip-on shoes, necklace and a ring on each finger. With such overwhelming evidence, the police changed his death from accidental drowning to homicide. But regardless of this, his death still remains unsolved.
Now, this story has added fuel to that of the smiley face killers theory, and all sorts of details have been added through time, and because of this it's now hard to distinguish what is actually the truth and what is actually made up.
To find out more, I contacted a friend of mine who investigates suspicious deaths for his YouTube channel, Lorden Arts. John Lorden dissects each case and investigates them in one of the most level-headed approaches I've ever come across on the internet. I asked him about his theory on the smiley face killers.
I guess you could say this was seen as a genuine case, at least from the perspective of 2 law enforcement personnel, and they were both retired New York City detectives, Kevin Gannon and Anthony Duarte. They're basically the guys that kind of found this pattern and tried to bring exposure to it. One of them wrote a book, and this theory is kind of included in that book as well. In terms of the media around it, I see strange patterns when it comes to media stories like this. They're very clickable. They've got that element of grabbing people's attention. So there is a lot of media around these cases that you could say does kind of support the theory, but there's also some very strong media that doesn't. There is a paper that was put out by the Center for Homicide Research, and they basically try to systematically go through this theory and show why it isn't valid. One of their points is, in terms of the deaths, there are actually 40 deaths that the two detectives are saying tied to this smiley face killer theory. But of those 40 deaths, only 12 of them actually had smiley faces close to where the body was found. Of course, you also have to consider that a body in a body of water is going to move. So the location of where the body is found and the graffiti being associated with where the body is found, for me, is a bit of a weak point in the conversation. How did they know that that's where the body was going to wind up? So it's one of those things where if you look at it logically and you start breaking it down, there's pieces that they sound really interesting. They might make you click on a news article, but if you really dig under that, it feels like it falls apart fairly quickly.
So, as you can see, not everyone is convinced by the serial killer theory, and even John sent me the paperwork from the Centre of Homicide Research to look at. And I have to say, a lot of it actually makes perfect sense.
The paper states that when it comes to the smiley faces, there were no common paint stroke, height, width, curl, whirl or drip. This makes it difficult to connect one incident to the next. Plus, none of the faces were fresh and most looked like they'd been there for years. But the paper also states that in some cases GHB was detected alongside high levels of alcohol in the deceased. But then goes on to say that GHB is a naturally produced chemical in the human body. But the question is, what amount does the human body produce naturally? And is it enough to discount a person being drugged?
Now, some people are actually saying the detectives ignited this story in order to publicise their book. But even I've wrote a book on the pusher side of things. So maybe you can say the same about me.
People write books for all sorts of reasons. Mine was because I was interested in the subject and it was something to tick off my bucket list of things to do. But in regards to Gannon, I obviously can't answer that. But one question I did ask John was, why is it that so many college-aged men are going missing after a night out? Not just in the US, but across the world.
It almost is like a perfect storm scenario where we've got young men, we've got colleges all over both Minnesota and Wisconsin as well. These guys are going out, they're drinking maybe a little too much, not feeling well. I think there is an element of embarrassment that might come into play there, where they don't want their friends to know that they're not feeling well, or they might have to throw up or something like that. And in many of these cases, they'll leave their friends without telling them that they've actually left. And I struggle with the logistics of trying to use drowning as a murder weapon. How do you know if that person knows how to swim or not? If you are going to subdue them in some way, how come we're not finding evidence of that when we find the bodies? We're not finding bodies where it's been obvious that someone's been tied up and attached to some type of weight, or beaten unconscious and then put into the water. That's not what's happening with these cases. In many of these cases, there are no marks on these people whatsoever. But then on the flip side of that, you have to wonder, well, then what's going on with these cases? These guys just falling into the water, don't happen to know how to swim or not. Maybe are shocked by the coldness of it, or too intoxicated to help themselves get out of it, swim until they're exhausted and succumb to the elements. That's what's really hard to understand about this theory, is even what seems like the more logical answer has problems when you really think about it on a case-by-case basis.
John said a lot of these deaths had no evidence of the person being beaten or subdued. But then again, the police said the same thing about Chris Jenkins, and they were wrong.
Another case I was pointed towards was that of Shane Montgomery, who went missing in 2014 after a night out.
A Fox News alert, the FBI now involved in the desperate search for a missing 21-year-old college student from Pennsylvania. Shane Montgomery vanished after being asked to leave a bar just outside of Philly the night before Thanksgiving. Yesterday, search teams dragging a canal near where he was last seen.
The 21-year-old Shane was described as 5'11" and weighed about 140 pounds and was last seen in the early hours of November the 27th and 2014. I spoke to a young lady from Philadelphia who remembered the story.
So a few years ago, maybe about 4 or 5 years ago, I first kind of heard about it. There was a boy from my area outside of Philadelphia who went out on Thanksgiving Eve, which is the night before Thanksgiving. It's the biggest bar night of the year. And he went out with a couple friends, went to a local pub, and had about 3 to 5 beers, maybe not too much. He wasn't too intoxicated, so they say. And he never came home that night, went missing. And it wasn't until a few months later that his body was actually found in the Schuylkill River.
Dive teams found Shane Montgomery's body at the bottom of the Schuylkill River about 10 feet offshore. Shane's uncle tells NBC 10 he sent a text to Shane's phone saying, "Come home." And just hours later, his body was recovered.
And at that point, all the media coverage, the news reports, and the papers were all tying a link to the Smiley Face killer's conspiracy theory. So at that time, that's when I started looking into it and thinking that, wow, this, you know, what I thought was an isolated incident could actually be part of a way bigger picture.
January 3rd, Shane's body was found, but by January the 4th, his death was ruled an accident by the authorities. But again, people on the internet started saying that this finding was way too fast and not enough time was put into finding the actual cause of death. And then even questioned if the autopsy had actually been done at all. And then the Smiley Face killer's theory started to raise its ugly head once again.
As with a lot of deaths surrounding serial killers and theories, I have no way of actually knowing what happened to Shane that night. But it does seem to be a recurring theme worldwide. Young man goes out, goes to a pub, walks outside, then disappears and is found in a body of water. But this just might be another case of alcohol and water doesn't mix, and it could have been an accident. But at the same time, was it just another case of lazy policing? And there is still that question of whether the Smiley Face killings and the pusher in Manchester are linked.
Do you think there is actually any links between the Manchester pusher and the Smiley Face killer here?
I think there definitely could be. Maybe it's kind of like somebody saw somebody's actions first and are kind of doing that as like a tribute thing. Maybe they were a fan of what they read about.
Now, as you've heard on previous episodes, some people are convinced that all these deaths are linked, and one way they say this is happening is by like-minded people joining groups that are only available on the dark web. Now, when you search the internet at home, on Google, at work or on your phone, etc., it's said that you only have access to about 4% of what is actually available on the internet, and the other 97% belongs on the dark web. Now, the dark web is an unregulated area of the internet that hosts unlisted websites that normal search engines just wouldn't touch with a barge pole because they're normally offering illegal goods or services.
Goods and services like fake passports, stolen or cloned credit cards, hackers for hire, drugs and guns.
But it's also claimed that it hosts hitmen for hire, human trafficking, bomb makers and everything else that's deemed illegal. So the fact of the matter is that the dark net is an extremely dangerous place and it's home to some of the most disturbing things that you will ever see or hear about. Now, I have to say at this point, what I'm about to show is extremely distressing and some people may want to switch off now. But I think it's important to show what type of things are available and what type of people we're actually talking about.
This piece of shit is Peter Scully, a father of 2 from Australia, who is also a paedophile who filmed the torture and murder of young children. It's said that he released a video titled Daisy's Destruction, which many thought was an urban myth because it was so extreme. It was like something straight out of a horror film. The video features the torture and brutal rape of a number of girls by Scully and others. The 3 victims, who were Lisa, aged 12, Cindy, 11, and Daisy, who was only 18 months, was sold to clients for up to $10,000. It showed Daisy being tied upside down by her feet, sexually assaulted and beaten over a 5-day period. It's claimed that she was whipped, parts of her body were amputated and assaulted with sex toys and much more. Scully was later arrested and is now serving life, and is said to be facing a further 60 charges relating to the rape and torture and murder of young children. I have to say that those are the only images I can find on Google and YouTube, and I have no way of knowing if they're actually real, but by all accounts they are, and unfortunately so is the case, and so is Scully. So, with people like that out there, is it possible for a group like the Smiley Face Killers or the Manchester Pusher to actually exist on the dark web? Plus there are questions like, who is to blame for the deaths in the canals of Manchester, the rivers of America and across the world? Is it serial killers, or are they just accidents? Now, there certainly are high numbers of young men going missing and turning up in water. But is this because we are just irresponsible drinkers and we now drink that much that we cannot function properly? So when we are near water, we can either do stupid things or we just stumble, slip and fall. But if that is the case, then why are there so many little deaths relating to females? Because let's face it, young ladies these days can sometimes drink just as much as men, and in some cases actually more, and will often take as many risks. Now, in the tragic case of Charlie Pope, would barriers have actually made a difference if they would have been there that night? And should the Canal and River Trust, councils and MPs be held accountable, since those are the people responsible for what the money is actually spent on? And do they actually have a duty of care when it comes to the public safety? But I suppose there's also that burning question of, what if the police are wrong about the deaths not being part of something more sinister? Or are they just spot on when it comes to saying they're just unfortunate accidents? Now, if there actually are groups out there of serial killers communicating via the internet, then why are we not finding things like smiley faces here in Manchester or anywhere else? And why are those that have been found in America all worn and out of date? Plus, if there was such a widespread group, then surely someone somewhere would have let something slip after all these years. Now, I could go on, but you've heard others, you've seen the film. What are your thoughts? Thanks for watching Curiosity, and remember, do something that scares you.